My name is Eleanor Hartwell and I am 72 years old. Most people look at me and see a frail, elderly woman who should be grateful for whatever scraps of attention her family throws her way. They could not be more wrong. I spent 40 years as a high school mathematics teacher, saving every penny I could squeeze from my modest salary. When I retired 5 years ago, I had accumulated $600,000 in my retirement account. That money represented decades of brown bag lunches, second-hand clothes, and vacations I never took. It was my security, my independence, my proof that hard work and sacrifice mean something. I never imagined my own son would try to steal it from me. The evening that changed everything started like any other Tuesday. I was in my small but comfortable home, the one I bought after my husband passed away 8 years ago. I had spent hours making it perfect with my grandmother's quilts, my collection of first edition novels, and photographs of better times. I was working on a crossword puzzle when someone began pounding on my front door with enough force to rattle the windows. My son David stood on my doorstep with his wife Amanda, both of them looking desperate and angry in equal measure. David is 38 now, but in that moment he looked like the same selfish child who used to throw tantrums when he did not get his way. Amanda, 35 and always perfectly put together, had her dark hair pulled back so tightly it made her face look harsh and mean. Her designer clothes and expensive jewelry seemed out of place given the panic in her eyes. David pushed past me without waiting for an invitation, Amanda following close behind. They collapsed onto my floral sofa like they owned the place, bringing with them an energy that made my peaceful home feel suddenly hostile and unwelcome. I offered them tea because that is what civilized people do when guests arrive, even uninvited ones. Amanda snapped that they did not have time for pleasantries. She had never liked me, not from the day David brought her home 6 years ago. To Amanda, I was just an obstacle between her and David's complete attention, an old woman who reminded David of responsibilities he would rather forget. David rubbed his face the way he used to when he was caught lying as a teenager. "Mom, we are in serious trouble. Really serious trouble. The bank is going to foreclose on our house." I set down my puzzle book and studied both of their faces carefully. "How much do you owe?" I asked quietly, though I suspected I already knew the answer would be more than they could handle. $450,000, David whispered. "Maybe more with all the penalties and legal fees they keep adding." The number hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I had been wondering when this moment would come. David had always spent money before earning it, always reaching for the next luxury before paying for the last one. The house they bought 3 years ago was far beyond their means, a massive modern monstrosity with a 3-car garage and a swimming pool that cost more than most people earn in a decade. Amanda leaned forward with that condescending tone she uses when she thinks I am being slow or stupid. "Eleanor, we do not need lectures about financial responsibility right now. We need solutions. And honestly, you are the only person who can fix this situation." The way she said my name like it was something distasteful she had to spit out, made my stomach clench with anger. This woman who had never worked a real job in her adult life, who spent her days at expensive spas and boutique fitness classes, was talking to me like I was a child who needed instruction. "What exactly do you want from me?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming next. David took my hands in his, the same gesture he had used when he wanted extra allowance money or permission to stay out past curfew. "Mom, you have all that retirement money just sitting there doing nothing. We are your family. We need you to pay off our mortgage so we can keep our home." The words hit me like a physical blow. $600,000. Every penny I had scraped together by working late tutoring sessions, by driving my car until it literally would not run anymore, by buying my clothes at thrift stores and eating generic food for decades. That is my retirement money, David. That money has to last me for the rest of my life. What happens when I get sick and need medical care or assisted living? Amanda actually laughed at my concern, a sharp, cruel sound that filled my living room with ugliness. "Come on, Eleanor. How much money does one old woman really need? You live in this tiny house. You never go anywhere or buy anything expensive. You could live on Social Security alone and be fine. What are you saving all that money for anyway?" The casual cruelty of her words took my breath away. "Old woman. tiny house. Like my life and my home and my careful planning meant absolutely nothing to her. This woman who had never struggled for anything, who married David specifically because she thought he would provide her with a comfortable lifestyle, was dismissing 4 decades of my hard work like it was pocket change. Besides, she continued, leaning back on my sofa like she was holding court, would not you rather help your only son keep his home? Is not that what mothers are supposed to do? Put their children's needs before their own selfish desires. I looked at David, searching his face for some sign of the little boy I had raised alone after his father died, the child I had read bedtime stories to and helped with homework and cheered for at Little League games. But all I saw was a man who sat there nodding while his wife insulted me and demanded my life savings. What happens to me if I give you this money? I asked slowly, my voice steadier than I felt inside. What happens when I can no longer take care of myself and need help? Amanda shrugged like my future was irrelevant to her. You will figure something out. You always do. People your age are resourceful. The dismissive way she spoke about people my age revealed everything I needed to know about how she really saw me. Not as David's mother or as a person who deserved respect, but as an inconvenience who happened to have access to money they wanted. And if I refused to give you the money? I asked, already knowing what the answer would be but needing to hear it said out loud. David and Amanda looked at each other with the kind of meaningful glance that couples share when they have already discussed something privately. When David spoke, his voice was cold and flat, empty of any warmth or affection. Then I guess you cannot be part of our lives anymore, Mom. Amanda does not want the children exposed to negative influences. And if you will not help family when we really need it, then what is the point of having a relationship with you at all? The children. My grandchildren, Emma and Sam, 9 and 7 years old, the only joy left in my world since David's father passed away. They were using them as weapons, holding them over my head like a threat they knew I could never ignore. Give us your money or never see your grandchildren again. Choose between your security and your family. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. Let me understand this correctly, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. You want me to give you my entire life savings, every penny I worked 40 years to accumulate, or you will cut me out of your lives completely. You will keep my grandchildren away from me forever unless I hand over everything I have. It is not like that, Mom, David said, but there was no conviction in his voice, no strength behind his words. He knew exactly what they were asking me to do. It is exactly like that, Amanda said, standing up to face me directly. She was taller than me by several inches, and she used every bit of that height advantage to look down at me with undisguised contempt. You can either be useful to this family or you can be alone. Your choice, Eleanor. Make it now. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my grandfather clock ticking in the corner, the same clock that had been in my childhood home, keeping time through all the years of my life. I thought about all the nights I had stayed late at school helping struggling students so I could earn extra pay for tutoring. All the times I had eaten peanut butter sandwiches for lunch instead of buying food from the cafeteria. All the small sacrifices that had built up to this moment when my own family was trying to rob me of everything I had worked for. I need time to think about this, I said finally, knowing I had already made my decision but not ready to announce it yet. Amanda rolled her eyes dramatically like I was being unreasonable for not immediately agreeing to give them everything I owned. What is there to think about, Eleanor? We are your family. This is what families do for each other. After they left, I sat in my chair staring at the spot where they had been sitting, the cushions still holding the shape of their bodies like an unwelcome reminder of what had just happened. I thought about my husband and how he used to worry that David was getting too comfortable asking us for money. I had always defended our son, insisting he was just starting out in life and needed our support. But this was not support. This was extortion dressed up as family obligation. I walked to my bedroom and pulled out the suitcase I had bought years ago for trips I never took because I was always too busy saving money. Piece by piece, I packed my most important belongings. My husband's watch, some photographs, my mother's jewelry, and enough clothes for several weeks. I left my house that night, locking the door behind me and leaving the key with my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, asking her to water my plants and collect my mail. I checked into a small hotel on the edge of town, The kind of place that served continental breakfast and did not ask too many questions about why a woman my age was staying alone without luggage. As I lay in the unfamiliar bed staring at the ceiling with its water stains and peeling paint, I made a decision that would change everything forever. David and Amanda wanted me to choose between my money and my family. They had given me an ultimatum, expecting me to surrender like I always had before when they needed something from me. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had forgotten that I was not just David's mother. I was Eleanor Hartwell, a woman who had managed classrooms full of difficult teenagers for 4 decades, who had dealt with demanding parents and stubborn administrators and budget constraints that would have broken lesser people. They wanted my money. They were about to learn what happens when you corner someone who has spent a lifetime solving problems that seemed impossible to solve. The hotel room smelled like industrial cleaning products and stale cigarette smoke, but I could not enjoy the quiet I had been craving for months. I sat by the window watching the sun rise over a parking lot full of cars belonging to people who were probably running away from something just like I was. But I was not running away. I was planning. I thought about the first time David had asked me for money. He was 22, fresh out of college, and wanted to buy a car he could not afford. I had written the check without question, proud that I could help my son start his adult life with something nice. Then there was the credit card debt when he was 25, the security deposit for his apartment when he was 27, the down payment for his wedding when he was 32. Always something, always a crisis that only Mom's checkbook could solve. When had I become nothing more than a source of emergency funding? When had my value as a person become tied entirely to my ability to solve their financial problems? The morning light was bright through the thin hotel curtains when I finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what had happened. My son, the baby I had rocked to sleep every night after his father died, had looked me in the eye and told me I was worthless unless I could pay his bills. But as I sat in that cramped hotel room with its scratchy sheets and broken air conditioner, something unexpected happened. Instead of feeling sorry for myself, I began to feel something else entirely. Anger. Pure, clean, focused anger at being taken for granted for so many years. And beneath the anger, something even more powerful. A sense of my own strength that I had forgotten I possessed. I pulled out my tablet and logged into my bank account. There it was, $607,043. Money I had earned by staying after school to help students who were struggling with algebra. Money I had saved by driving my Honda until it had 300,000 miles on the odometer. Money that represented every sacrifice I had made for security and independence. David and Amanda thought this money belonged to them somehow, like I was just holding it in trust until they decided they needed it. They were about to learn how wrong they were about that and about me. I started researching online, something I had gotten very good at during my years as a teacher. It is amazing what you can discover when you have time and motivation and a burning desire for justice. I looked up their address, their mortgage company, their payment history. Public records are wonderful things when you know where to look and how to interpret what you find. David and Amanda had bought their house 3 years ago for $750,000, putting down only 5%. Their monthly payment was over $5,000, not counting insurance and property taxes that added another $1,000 each month. They had already missed 4 payments. The foreclosure process had been started 2 months ago. They had maybe 6 weeks before the bank took everything back and put the house up for auction. I found myself smiling for the first time since David had knocked on my door. They were in much worse trouble than they had admitted to me. This was not just a temporary cash flow problem they needed help with. This was complete financial disaster they had been hiding for months, maybe even years. My phone rang, David's name appearing on the screen. Mom, where are you? Mrs. Patterson said you left and your house is empty. Where did you go? His voice was tight with panic, and I felt that old familiar pull to comfort him, to make everything better the way I had when he was small and scared. The old Eleanor would have rushed back home to fix whatever was wrong, to write whatever check was needed to make the problem go away. The new Eleanor let the phone ring until it stopped, then turned it off completely. He called 12 more times over the next hour. Then Amanda called, then David again, then a number I did not recognize. I ignored them all and went to take a long shower, letting the hot water wash away 40 years of being taken for granted. When I emerged from the bathroom, I had 23 missed calls and 18 text messages. Mom, please call me back. We need to talk about this like adults. Eleanor, this silent treatment is childish and ridiculous. Call us back immediately. Mom, I am scared. Please do not abandon us like this. We are your family. I deleted every message without reading them completely. Instead, I got dressed, put on my good jewelry, and drove to the public library. I spent the next 6 hours learning about real estate law, foreclosure procedures, and auction processes. I learned that when a house goes to foreclosure auction, anyone with cash can bid on it. I learned that most foreclosure auctions happen at the courthouse with very little advertising to the general public. I learned that houses often sell for much less than they are worth because most people do not know about the auctions or do not have cash ready to bid. Most importantly, I learned that David and Amanda's house would be auctioned in exactly 5 weeks, at 10 o'clock in the morning on the courthouse steps. The librarian, a kind woman about my age named Patricia, asked if I was thinking about getting into real estate investing. Something like that, I said, printing out pages of legal documents and auction schedules. Good for you, she said with genuine enthusiasm. It is never too late to try something new and build wealth for yourself. Build wealth for myself. I liked the sound of that very much. That afternoon I called my old friend Robert Chen, who had been a colleague at the school district for 15 years before becoming a real estate attorney. We had always gotten along well, and I knew I could trust him to be discreet and professional. Eleanor. His voice was warm and friendly when he answered. What a wonderful surprise. How have you been managing in retirement? I have been thinking about expanding my financial portfolio, Robert. If someone wanted to buy a house at a foreclosure auction, how would that process work exactly? He spent 30 minutes explaining everything I needed to know. The paperwork requirements, the cashier's checks, the research that should be done before bidding, the legal complications that could arise. He offered to help me if I was serious about pursuing real estate investment. I might be very serious about it, I told him. I will let you know within the next few days. Eleanor, he said before we hung up, I do not know what has brought this on, but I think it shows tremendous courage. You have always been too conservative with your money, too afraid to take risks. Sometimes you have to be bold to get what you deserve in life. That evening I sat in the hotel restaurant eating a meal that tasted better than anything I had cooked for myself in months. I made lists while I ate, lists of what I knew, what I needed to learn, what I needed to do to make this plan work perfectly. By the time I finished my dessert, I had a complete strategy mapped out. It was not a plan for reconciliation or compromise. It was not a plan to teach David and Amanda a lesson they might learn from and improve their behavior. It was a plan for complete, total, and permanent justice. They had given me an ultimatum, demanding I choose between my money and my family. They were about to discover there was a third option they had never considered. I could take their house and keep my money too. The old Eleanor would have been horrified by what I was planning. The old Eleanor believed in forgiveness and second chances, in doing what was right even when others did not. But the old Eleanor was gone forever, buried under the weight of her own family's greed and cruelty. I raised my water glass in a toast to the empty restaurant around me. Here is to new beginnings, I whispered. Outside it was starting to rain, but the sound was peaceful rather than melancholy. Rain washes things clean, makes room for new growth. Sometimes destruction is just another word for opportunity. My phone buzzed with another call from David. This time I answered on the third ring, curious to hear what new manipulation he might try. Hello, David. Mom, thank God you answered. Where are you? We have been worried sick about you. No, you have not, I said calmly. You have been worried about your mortgage payment and whether I am going to save your house for you. That is not the same thing as being worried about me. Silence on the other end of the line, the kind of shocked quiet that comes when someone realizes their lies have been seen through completely. Mom, please come home so we can talk about this situation like reasonable adults. I'm talking like an adult, David. That is exactly the problem. I am finally seeing this situation with complete clarity for the first time. What do you mean by that? I mean I have made my decision about your ultimatum, and I choose to lose my family. I hung up and turned off the phone again, then sat back in the comfortable hotel chair and began planning the complete destruction of everything my son thought he deserved. Some stories end with forgiveness and healing and families coming back together stronger than before. This was not going to be one of those stories. The next morning I woke up with more energy than I had felt in years. While David and Amanda were probably lying awake wondering where their emergency funding source had disappeared to, I was making phone calls and checking items off my list like a general preparing for the most important battle of her life. My first stop was the courthouse, where I wanted to examine the foreclosure documents myself to understand exactly how much time we were working with. The clerk, a helpful woman with tired eyes, showed me how to access public records on their computer system. "Here it is," she said, pulling up the file on her screen. "Thompson, David Michael and Amanda Rose. 147 Maple Ridge Court. Filed 8 weeks ago. Auction scheduled for 4 weeks from today." I studied the documents carefully, taking notes on everything that seemed important. The amount they owed was actually higher than David had told me. $497,000, plus late fees, legal costs, and accrued interest. The total debt was over $540,000. "Does this mean the house could sell for less than what they owe?" I asked the clerk. "Oh, absolutely," she said. "Depending on the condition of the property and how many people show up to bid. Foreclosure properties often sell for 60 to 70 cents on the dollar. Sometimes even less if there are not many interested bidders." I felt that familiar flutter of excitement in my chest, the same feeling I used to get when I solved a particularly difficult math problem or helped a struggling student finally understand a concept they had been fighting with for weeks. "Thank you so much," I said. "You have been extremely helpful." Next I drove to Maple Ridge Court to see David and Amanda's house with my own eyes. I had not visited them in over a year because they usually preferred to meet at restaurants when they needed something from me, claiming their house was always too messy or they were too busy with renovations to have guests over. Looking at the property now, I understood the real reason they had not wanted me to visit. The massive house that had once looked perfect in the photographs they used to show me was now showing serious signs of neglect and financial stress. The lawn was brown and overgrown with weeds. The expensive landscaping was dying. One of the automatic garage doors was hanging crooked on its tracks. This was not just a temporary money problem. This was a family that had given up on maintaining appearances because they knew they were going to lose everything anyway. I parked across the street and took photographs with my phone, documenting every problem and repair issue I could see from the outside. If I was going to bid on this property, I needed to understand exactly what I would be buying and what additional money I might need to spend to make it presentable again. I walked around the entire perimeter, noting that the roof looked solid and the foundation seemed intact, but there was definitely work that would need to be done. More importantly, I needed to know what the house was really worth in good condition so I could determine how much I should be willing to bid at the auction. I called Jennifer Walsh, a real estate agent I had met at my book club several months earlier. "Eleanor, how nice to hear from you," she said when I identified myself. "Are you thinking about selling your house and moving somewhere different?" "Not exactly," I said. "I was wondering if you could give me an approximate market value for a property. Nothing formal, just a rough estimate so I can understand the local real estate market better." I gave her David's address and waited while she looked up recent sales of comparable homes in that neighborhood. "Oh my, this is a beautiful area," she said. "Let me see what similar houses have sold for recently." Based on the most recent sales data, I would estimate the current market value at around $675,000. It is a lovely house in an excellent neighborhood with top-rated schools. $675,000. If I could buy it at auction for $400,000 or less, I would be getting it for almost 40% below market value. And David and Amanda would be homeless, their credit destroyed, their children forced to change schools and leave their friends behind. Sounded absolutely perfect to me. I called Robert Chen again that afternoon. "Robert, this is Eleanor. I have been thinking more seriously about that foreclosure auction we discussed. I would like to hire you to represent me in the bidding process." "Wonderful," he said. "Have you identified a specific property you want to target?" I gave him David's address and heard him take a sharp breath on the other end of the line. "Eleanor," he said slowly, "is this not your son's house?" How did you know that? I asked, though I was not really surprised he had made the connection. I handle legal work for several families in that neighborhood. I remember doing some research on property values there last year and I recognized the address. May I ask what is happening in this situation? I had prepared for this question and decided that Robert deserved complete honesty since I was asking him to help me with something that might seem unusual or ethically questionable to some people. My son and his wife recently informed me that unless I give them my entire retirement savings, $600,000, they no longer want me in their lives. They seem to believe I am too old and useless to need my own money for my own future. They threaten to keep my grandchildren away from me forever unless I hand over everything I have worked 40 years to accumulate. Oh, Eleanor, Robert said, and I could hear genuine shock and anger in his voice. That is completely unacceptable behavior. I'm so sorry they put you in that position. Yes, it is unacceptable, I agreed. And I have decided to take them at their word. If they do not want me as their mother, then I do not want them as my family. This house is going to auction and I plan to buy it. After that, I will decide what to do with the property. Seems like it might be a good investment opportunity. Robert was quiet for a long moment. Eleanor, he said finally, I want to make sure you have thought this through completely. This is a very dramatic step that will probably destroy your relationship with your son permanently. Have you considered trying to work things out through family counseling or mediation? Robert, I said, I have spent the last 4 days thinking about nothing else. I have never been more certain of anything in my entire life. My son chose to give me an ultimatum. He chose to treat me like a bank account with feelings. He chose to threaten my relationship with my grandchildren unless I gave him everything I own. I am simply responding to his choices with choices of my own. All right then, Robert said. Let us do this properly. We spent the next 2 hours going over every detail of the auction process. Robert would represent me as my attorney, bidding on my behalf so I could remain anonymous until the sale was completed. We would need a cashier's check for the full amount I was willing to bid, plus extra money for closing costs and legal fees. He would handle all the paperwork to make sure everything was legal and binding. Most importantly, he would conduct a thorough title search to make sure there were no liens or other complications that could affect my ownership of the property after the purchase. One more thing I need you to understand, Robert, I said before we finalized our agreement. I want this transaction kept completely confidential until everything is final. No one should know I am the buyer until after the sale is completed and all the legal documents are signed. Course, he said. Attorney-client privilege covers everything we discuss and everything we do together. Your identity will be protected until you decide to reveal it yourself. That evening I treated myself to dinner at the nicest restaurant in town, the kind of place David and Amanda used to say was too expensive for someone on a fixed income like me. I ordered the filet mignon and a glass of red wine that cost more than I usually spent on groceries in a week. I raised my glass to my reflection in the restaurant window and whispered a toast to new beginnings and second chances and the sweet satisfaction of justice finally being served. My phone had been buzzing all day with calls and texts from David and Amanda, but I had ignored every single one. Curiosity finally got the better of me, and I scrolled through the messages while I waited for my dessert to arrive. Mom, please stop playing these games with us. We need to know what you have decided about helping us. Eleanor, this silent treatment is completely childish. You are acting like a spoiled teenager. Call us back immediately. The bank called again today. We are running out of time to resolve this situation. Mom, I am really scared. Please do not abandon your family when we need you most. That last message from David almost got to me. Almost made me feel guilty for what I was planning. Almost. But then I remembered Amanda's cruel laughter when she called me a useless old woman, and the feeling passed completely. I typed one simple response that I sent to both of their phone numbers. I told you I have made my decision about your ultimatum. You will hear from me when I am ready to discuss the consequences of your choices. Then I blocked both of their numbers and turned off my phone for the rest of the evening. The waiter brought me chocolate cake for dessert, something I had not ordered in years because I always thought it was too rich and indulgent. It was absolutely delicious. On the drive back to the hotel, I realized I was humming an old song my husband used to love. I had not hummed or sung anything in years. There was something incredibly liberating about finally admitting that the people who were supposed to love you unconditionally had actually been keeping score all along, measuring your worth by what you could do for them rather than who you were as a person. Before going to sleep, I stood in front of the hotel bathroom mirror and really looked at myself for the first time in months. My hair was silver white, styled in the same neat way I had worn it for 20 years. My face showed the lines of 7 decades of living, but my eyes were bright and clear and determined. I was still wearing the small gold cross necklace my husband had given me for our 25th anniversary, and it caught the bathroom light as I moved. "Hello, Eleanor," I said to my reflection. "Nice to finally meet the real you, the woman who does not apologize for taking up space in the world." I had spent so many years being David's mother, my husband's wife, the teacher who took care of everyone else's children, that I had forgotten what it felt like to be just myself. It felt powerful and exciting and a little bit dangerous in the best possible way. Tomorrow I would start the process of becoming a property owner and landlord. In 4 weeks I would own the house my son thought he deserved simply because he existed. And after that, well, we would see what other surprises life had in store for all of us. Some people might call what I was planning cruel or vindictive or unnecessarily harsh. I called it fair and proportionate and long overdue. The difference between cruelty and justice is that cruelty is random and emotional, while justice is measured and appropriate to the offense. David and Amanda had tried to steal my security and leave me with nothing in my old age. Now they would learn what nothing actually looked like when it was applied to their own lives. Auction day arrived with the crisp clarity of a perfect autumn morning. I had slept better the night before than I had in weeks. Not from peace but from anticipation. It felt like Christmas morning when I was a child, that electric feeling of knowing something wonderful was about to happen. I dressed very carefully that morning in my best navy suit, my gold jewelry, and the watch my husband had given me for our 30th wedding anniversary. I wanted to look respectable and trustworthy, like someone who belonged among serious real estate investors. More importantly, I wanted to look like someone who could write a very large check without it causing any financial hardship. Robert met me at a coffee shop 3 blocks from the courthouse at 9 o'clock sharp. He looked slightly worried, the way good friends do when they think you might be making a mistake but care too much about you to try to stop you from making your own decisions. "Eleanor," he said, stirring his coffee slowly, "you know I will do whatever you ask me to do as your attorney. But I have to ask one more time if you are absolutely certain about this course of action. Once we buy this house, there will be no going back. Your relationship with your son will probably be destroyed forever." "Robert," I said, meeting his eyes directly, "for weeks ago I thought I had a loving family who cared about me as a person. I thought my son respected me and my daughter-in-law at least tolerated me. Then they told me I was worthless unless I handed over my entire life savings to solve problems they created through their own poor choices and dishonesty. Yes, I am absolutely certain about this." He nodded slowly and pulled out his briefcase. "All right then," he said. "I have the cashier's check for $400,000, and I have researched the title thoroughly. The property is clear except for the mortgage debt we already know about. If we win the bidding, we can close the sale immediately." We walked to the courthouse together, arriving at exactly 9:45. There were already about 20 people gathered on the steps, most of them looking like professional real estate investors with their suits and folders and clipboards. A few neighbors from David Street had come to watch out of curiosity, probably wondering who would buy their neighbor's house and what that might mean for their own property values. Mrs. Martinez from 2 houses down caught my eye and waved politely. I waved back, wondering what she would think when she eventually learned that the mysterious buyer was the grandmother she had chatted with at neighborhood barbecues for the past 3 years. The auctioneer was a tall man with a voice trained to carry across crowds and cutting through noise and distractions. He read through the legal description of the property, the terms of the sale, and the minimum bid requirements with the efficiency of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. "We will start the bidding at $300,000, the auctioneer announced. 6 hands went up immediately, including Robert's. This was more competition than we had expected, and I felt my first moment of real anxiety. What if I could not afford to win? What if someone else bought David's house and ruined my carefully planned revenge? The bidding moved quickly through the early rounds. $310,000, $320,000, $330,000. One by one, bidders dropped out as the price climbed higher than they were willing or able to pay. By the time we reached $370,000, only 3 hands were still going up. Roberts, a man in an expensive suit who looked like a professional investor, and a woman with a clipboard who was probably bidding for a real estate company. $380,000. $390,000. $400,000. The woman with the clipboard shook her head and stepped back, leaving only Robert and the professional investor still in the game. $410,000. $420,000. $430,000. The other bidder hesitated when Robert signaled $440,000, looking at his notes and calculating whether the property was worth going any higher. The auctioneer called out, "Do I hear $450,000? Silence. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure everyone around me could hear it beating against my ribs. $440,000 going once, the auctioneer called. Going twice. Sold to bidder number 15 for $440,000. Robert turned to me with a satisfied smile. "Congratulations, Eleanor," he said quietly. "You just bought yourself a house." The paperwork took almost 4 hours to complete. Robert handled most of the legal details while I sat in the courthouse cafeteria drinking terrible coffee and watching people go about their normal Tuesday business, completely unaware that they were witnessing one of the most important days of my entire life. "What happens next?" I asked Robert when he finally finished with all the documents and official stamps and signatures. "Well," he said, "now you need to serve eviction papers. As the new owner, you have the legal right to remove any tenants who do not have a valid lease agreement. Since David and Amanda lost the house to foreclosure, they have no legal right to remain on the property." "How long do they have to move out?" 30 days is standard," Robert explained. "After that, if they refuse to leave voluntarily, you can have them removed by the sheriff's department." I wrote checks for everything that needed to be paid. Robert's legal fees, the recording costs, the property management company I had hired to handle the eviction process professionally and by the book. Each check felt like a small victory, a concrete step toward the justice I had been planning for weeks. As we walked back to our cars, Robert asked what I planned to do with the house after David and Amanda were evicted. I had not decided yet, I told him honestly. Maybe I would rent it out as an investment property. Maybe I would sell it for a profit. Maybe I would move in myself and enjoy having a larger space for my books and hobbies. "It is my house now," I said simply. "I will do whatever I want with it." That evening I moved out of the hotel and into a furnished apartment I had rented nearby. It was clean and comfortable with a small balcony where I could sit and think about everything that had happened and everything that was about to happen. I made myself dinner and opened a bottle of wine I had bought specifically to celebrate this moment. Then I sat by the window and called Karen Phillips, the property management company I had hired to handle the eviction process professionally and legally. "Mrs. Hartwell, this is Karen speaking. Congratulations on your successful purchase today. We will have the eviction notice served first thing tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock sharp. I want everything done properly and by the book," I emphasized. Course, Karen assured me. "The current occupants will have 30 days from the time they are served to vacate the premises voluntarily. If they refuse to leave, we will file the necessary court documents to have them removed by law enforcement. What if they try to claim they have some legal right to remain in the house? They have no legal standing whatsoever," Karen explained. "The foreclosure was properly executed and your purchase was completely legitimate. They are now trespassing on your property and have no choice but to leave within the specified time period." After I hung up, I sat in my comfortable chair and thought about David and Amanda going about their evening routine. Probably still hoping I would call with news that I had decided to pay their mortgage after all. They had no idea that in 10 hours they would learn not only that I was not saving their house, but that I was the reason they were losing it. I thought about the conversation we would have when they discovered the truth. David would be shocked and hurt, probably angry that I had betrayed him so completely. Amanda would be furious, probably calling me names I had never heard before and threatening to take legal action against me. They would demand explanations, insist that I had lost my mind, Promise that they would never speak to me again if I went through with this. That last threat did not bother me at all. In fact, it sounded like a promise I hoped they would keep. I raised my wine glass toward the window, toward the house I now owned across town, toward the son who thought he could throw me away like yesterday's newspaper. Here is to property ownership, I whispered. And here is to learning that every ultimatum is really just an opportunity wearing a disguise. Some mothers would have felt guilty about what I had done. Some mothers would have questioned themselves, worried about being too harsh or vindictive. I was not some mothers. I was Eleanor Hartwell, property owner and woman of independent means. And I had never felt more like myself in my entire life. I woke up the next morning at 7:30 with the kind of excitement usually reserved for birthdays and holidays. Karen's assistant would be knocking on David's door in 30 minutes. And I wanted to be awake to savor every moment of knowing what was about to happen to them. I made coffee, real coffee from expensive beans I had bought for myself, and sat by my window with a clear view of the city waking up below me. Somewhere across town, my son and his wife were probably eating breakfast and getting the children ready for school, going through their normal morning routine with no idea that their world was about to collapse completely. At exactly 8:15 my phone rang. Karen Phillips calling with an update. Mrs. Hartwell, the eviction notice has been successfully served. Mrs. Amanda Thompson answered the door and accepted the legal papers. She seemed very surprised and asked several questions about who the new owner was. I could only imagine Amanda in her expensive silk bathrobe and perfect makeup, opening the door expecting a package delivery, and instead receiving formal eviction papers from the new owner of her house. Any immediate reaction I should know about, I asked. She demanded to know who had purchased the property, Karen reported. My assistant correctly told her that information would be provided through proper legal channels once the sale was finalized. Mrs. Thompson used some rather colorful language and slammed the door quite forcefully. I smiled to myself, picturing Amanda's fury at being spoken to by someone she could not intimidate or manipulate. What happens next in the process? They have 30 days from today to remove all their belongings and vacate the property, Karen explained. If they do not leave voluntarily, we will begin formal eviction proceedings through the court system. That process typically takes an additional 2 to 3 weeks, but the outcome is certain given the circumstances. I spent the rest of the morning running errands and taking care of practical matters. Opening a new bank account at a different branch, buying groceries for my apartment, picking up dry cleaning I had dropped off weeks ago. Normal activities that felt extraordinary because I was doing them as a woman who had just taken complete control of her own life in the most dramatic way possible. Around noon, my old phone started buzzing frantically with incoming calls and messages. I had given Karen my new number but kept the old phone to monitor David and Amanda's reaction to their eviction notice. Time to see what they had discovered. 26 missed calls, 41 text messages, and 5 voicemails. I looked through the text messages first, watching their panic and confusion unfold in real time. Mom, what did you do? Call me right now. We need to talk about this immediately. Eleanor, this is insane. You cannot do this to your own family. The eviction notice says the house was sold yesterday at auction. Who bought it and how do we contact them? Mom, please call us back. There has to be some kind of mistake here. Someone is trying to steal our house and we need your help to stop them. Margaret is crying and the children do not understand what is happening. Please fix this situation. You are the only person who can help us. I am your son. How could you let someone do this to your own family? The voicemails were even more entertaining. David's voice was cracking with panic and desperation. Mom, please call me back as soon as you get this message. Something terrible has happened. Someone bought our house at auction yesterday and now they are trying to kick us out. We need your help figuring out who did this and how to fight it. Please, Mom, I really need you right now. The second voicemail was Amanda, her voice sharp with anger and accusation. Eleanor, I do not know what kind of sick game you are playing, but it ends right now. You disappear for weeks, you ignore our calls for help, and now suddenly strangers are trying to steal our house. This cannot be a coincidence. You need to call us back immediately and explain what is happening. I saved both voicemails to listen to again later when I needed a reminder of how much they had underestimated my intelligence and determination. But I was not ready to talk to them yet. Let them spend a few more hours wondering and panicking, calling lawyers and real estate agents and anyone else they could think of who might be able to help them. Let them feel the powerlessness and helplessness they had tried to force on me when they demanded my life savings. Instead of calling them back, I decided to do some reconnaissance work. I drove to the grocery store in their neighborhood, not to spy exactly, but to get a sense of how the news was spreading and what people were saying about the mysterious buyer who had purchased the Thompson house. I was in the produce section selecting apples when I heard familiar voices behind me. I turned slightly and saw Mrs. Martinez from David Street talking to another woman by the lettuce display. "I am telling you, Linda, it is the strangest thing that has happened in our neighborhood in years," Mrs. Martinez was saying. "Someone specifically targeted their house at the foreclosure auction yesterday. It was not just a random investment purchase." "But who would do such a thing?" the other woman asked. "That is what everyone is trying to figure out," Mrs. Martinez replied. "Amanda Thompson is beside herself with worry and confusion. She has been making phone calls all morning trying to find out who bought their house and why. She is convinced it is someone they know, someone who has some kind of personal grudge against them. She spent an hour this morning making a list of everyone they have ever had problems with or disagreements with." I smiled as I put my apples in a bag and moved toward the checkout line. "Make all the lists you want, Amanda. You will never suspect your supposedly helpless and useless mother-in-law." "The saddest part," Mrs. Martinez continued, "is watching the children deal with this situation. Little Emma keeps asking why strangers want to take their house away, and Sam has been having nightmares about having to sleep in their car." The mention of my grandchildren gave me a small pang of guilt, but I pushed it away immediately. David and Amanda had chosen to use Emma and Sam as weapons when they threatened to cut me out of their lives forever. They had created this entire situation through their own greed and financial irresponsibility. I had not put those children at risk. Their parents had. That evening I called Karen Phillips for another update on how David and Amanda were handling the eviction process. "How are they responding to the 30-day notice?" I asked. "Not well, I am afraid," Karen reported. "They have been calling my office every few hours demanding to speak directly with the property owner. Mrs. Thompson has been particularly difficult and hostile. She seems to think if she yells loudly enough, she can somehow make this situation go away." Any legal attempts to fight the eviction, I wondered. "Their attorney has reviewed all the paperwork and advised them there are no grounds for appeal," Karen explained. "The foreclosure was properly executed according to state law. The auction was legal and transparent. Your purchase is completely binding and legitimate. They have no choice except to accept the situation and find somewhere else to live." 1 week left, I thought to myself. In 1 week David and Amanda would be loading their belongings into a moving truck, their children confused and frightened, their perfect suburban lifestyle destroyed forever. The thought should have made me feel guilty or sad. Instead, it made me feel vindicated and satisfied. My phone buzzed with another text message from David's number. I had been checking them periodically for entertainment value and to track their growing desperation. "Mom, please respond to our messages. We know you are getting them. The children are scared and confused about what is happening. Please do not do this to your innocent grandchildren." Using Emma and Sam as emotional leverage again. It was pathetic how predictable they had become. I typed back a brief response. "I thought you said I was not family anymore. Why would your children's housing situation be my concern or responsibility?" The reply came back immediately. "Mom, please. We can work this out. We made a mistake. We should not have given you that ultimatum. Can we please talk about this like adults?" "Too late for that," I wrote back. "You made your choice when you decided I was worthless unless I gave you everything I owned. Now you get to live with the consequences of that choice." Then I blocked David's number permanently. Tomorrow I had an appointment to walk through my house with Karen Phillips. We needed to assess the condition of the property after David and Amanda moved out and plan for any repairs or cleaning that might be needed before I decided what to do with it long term. The idea of walking through David's house as its legal owner filled me with anticipation that felt almost like joy. I had been inside that house many times over the years, always as a guest, always careful not to overstay my welcome, always grateful to be included in their supposedly perfect family life. Tomorrow I would walk through it as the person who owned every square inch of it. The person who would decide its future and control who was allowed to enter it. The person with all the power in the relationship for the first time in years. Some people might call what I was feeling revenge or vindictiveness. I preferred to think of it as justice finally being served after years of being taken for granted. The difference between revenge and justice is that revenge is emotional and often disproportionate to the original offense. Justice is calculated and precisely equal to the harm that was done. David and Amanda had tried to steal my financial security and leave me defenseless in my old age. Now they would learn what real vulnerability felt like when it was applied to their own lives instead of mine. Walking through my house as its rightful owner was even more satisfying than I had imagined it would be. Karen Phillips met me at the front door with a complete set of keys, my keys now, and we spent 2 hours going through every room methodically, checking the condition and making notes about what would need to be done. The property is in better condition than I expected, Karen said, writing on her clipboard. The current occupants have maintained it reasonably well considering their financial stress. Most of the problems are cosmetic rather than structural. The house felt different now that it belonged to me. Smaller somehow, less impressive than it had seemed when David and Amanda were showing it off to me. The granite countertops that Amanda had bragged about looked dated and cheap. The hardwood floors needed refinishing and the paint was fading in several rooms. This was not the palace they had pretended it was when they were trying to justify spending more than they could afford. It was just a house, an overpriced house they had never been financially qualified to purchase in the first place. "What are your plans for the property after the current occupants vacate?" Karen asked as we finished our inspection. "I am not entirely sure yet," I told her honestly. "I might rent it out as an investment property. I might renovate it and sell it for a profit. I might even consider moving in myself if I decide I want more space. I have time to make that decision after I see what condition they leave it in." What I did not tell Karen was that I was seriously considering the most poetic option of all. Moving into the house myself and living there permanently. Imagine David and Amanda driving by their former home and seeing me in the front garden, tending to flowers they had let die, enjoying the peace and security they had thrown away through their own greed and stupidity. But that decision could wait until after they were gone and I could see how it felt to be there without their presence contaminating the atmosphere. That afternoon I called Detective Harrison Mills, a private investigator Robert Chan had recommended when I mentioned that I was curious about David and Amanda's financial history. I had been thinking about my conversation with Robert about potential legal consequences, and something had been bothering me about how easily David and Amanda had obtained such large mortgage loans given their actual income level. "Mr. Mills," I said when he answered his phone, "I would like to hire you to conduct a financial background investigation on 2 individuals." "What kind of investigation specifically?" he asked. "I want to know if certain people might have provided false information on their mortgage applications or other loan documents. Mortgage fraud is a serious federal crime," he said after a moment of silence. "Are you saying you suspect someone of deliberately lying to banks about their income or assets?" "I am saying I have questions about the honesty and accuracy of certain financial statements, and I would like those questions answered with facts and documentation." We met the following evening at a quiet restaurant across town. Detective Mills was exactly what I had expected him to be. Middle-aged, unremarkable, with a kind of forgettable face that was perfect for someone whose job required blending into crowds and gathering information without being noticed. "What specifically are you looking for?" he asked, pulling out a small notebook. I gave him David and Amanda's full names, their address, and the approximate dates of their various mortgage applications over the past 5 years. "I want to know if the income levels they reported to lenders match their actual tax returns and employment records," I explained. "I want to know if any businesses they claim to own actually exist. I want to know if they have been honest about their financial situation or if they have been systematically lying to obtain money they were not qualified to borrow." "That kind of investigation is definitely possible," Mills said. "It might take several weeks to gather all the information legally and verify it independently, but I have contacts at credit agencies and financial institutions who can help me access the relevant records." "Money is not an object," I told him. I want to know the complete truth about their finances, regardless of what that truth turns out to be. And if you find evidence of fraud or other illegal activity, what would you like me to do with that information? I met his eyes steadily across the restaurant table. I want you to prepare a comprehensive report with all the supporting documentation. Then I will decide whether that information needs to be shared with the appropriate law enforcement authorities. He nodded and quoted me a retainer fee of $12,000 to begin the investigation. I wrote the check without hesitation, knowing it was money well spent regardless of what he discovered. If David and Amanda had been honest on their loan applications, I would be out $12,000, but I would know they were guilty only of poor financial planning rather than actual crimes. If they had lied about their income or assets, well, then they would soon be facing consequences much more serious than just losing their house. 6 weeks later, Detective Mills called with news that exceeded my highest expectations. "Mrs. Hartwell," he said, "I think you are going to want to review this report in person rather than discussing it over the phone. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow afternoon?" The next day I sat in his cluttered office while he spread documents across his desk like a detective presenting evidence in a murder case. "Your instincts were absolutely correct," he said without any preamble. "David and Amanda Thompson have been committing systematic mortgage fraud for the past 4 years. He showed me the evidence piece by piece, each document more damaging than the last. Income statements that had been inflated by more than 60%. Tax returns that had been altered before being submitted to lenders. Employment verification letters from companies that did not exist or had never employed either of them. This mortgage application from 2 years ago," he said, pointing to a document, claims David was earning $85,000 annually. His actual tax return from that year shows income of $41,000. "The refinancing documents are even worse," Mills continued. "They claimed combined income of $115,000 when their real combined income was $59,000. Amanda also claimed to have a consulting business that generated $28,000 per year. I cannot find any evidence this business ever existed or filed any tax returns." I studied the papers he had assembled, amazed by the scope and boldness of their deception. They had not just stretched the truth or made optimistic projections about future earnings. They had created a completely fictional financial identity and used it to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from multiple banks. "Is this sufficient evidence for criminal charges?" I asked. "More than sufficient," Mills replied. "This is textbook mortgage fraud involving multiple felony counts across several years. The FBI Financial Crimes Division takes this type of systematic fraud very seriously, especially when the amounts involved are this substantial. What would happen if someone were to report this information to federal authorities? There would be a thorough investigation by the FBI and federal prosecutors," Mills explained. "If the evidence holds up under scrutiny, and it absolutely will, the defendants would face multiple felony charges. Prison sentences of 8 to 12 years would be typical for this level of fraud, along with massive fines and complete asset forfeiture." I gathered up the copies he had prepared for me, each one a nail in the coffin of David and Amanda's future freedom. "Thank you, Detective Mills," I said. "This is exactly the kind of thorough, professional work I was hoping for." That evening I sat in my apartment with the fraud report spread across my kitchen table like a roadmap to justice. Each falsified document represented another lie they had told, another institution they had cheated, another step toward the complete destruction of their lives. They had built their entire lifestyle on criminal deception, and now those lies were about to catch up with them in the most devastating way possible. But I wanted to be strategic about how and when I used this information. I called Robert Chen for legal advice about the proper procedures for reporting federal crimes. "Robert," I said, "hypothetically speaking, if someone discovered evidence of mortgage fraud, what would be the correct way to report it to authorities?" "Hypothetically," he replied, "they would contact the FBI Financial Crimes Division and possibly the District Attorney's Office as well. Both agencies have specialized task forces that handle mortgage fraud cases. Would the person making the report need to be involved in any prosecution that might result? Possibly as a witness if the case went to trial, but the government prosecutors would handle everything else." The reporting party would not need to hire their own attorney or be responsible for proving the case. On Monday morning, I drove to the FBI field office in the federal building downtown. I wore my best gray suit and carried myself with the dignity of a respectable citizen who had important information to share with law enforcement. I would like to report a case of systematic mortgage fraud, I told the receptionist at the front desk. An hour later, I sat across from Special Agent Maria Rodriguez, handing over copies of Detective Mill's comprehensive investigation. She reviewed the documents with the careful attention of someone who had seen many similar cases and knew exactly what to look for. "This is very thorough documentation," she said finally. "Where did you obtain these financial records?" "I hired a licensed private investigator after I became suspicious about certain individuals' claims regarding their income and assets," I explained calmly. "And what is your relationship to the subjects of this investigation?" I met her eyes steadily without blinking or showing any emotion. "Former acquaintances who attempted to defraud me personally through extortion and threats. When that failed, I became curious about what other dishonest activities they might be involved in." Agent Rodriguez made detailed notes in her case file. "We will need to verify all of this information independently through our own investigation, but if it checks out the way it appears to, we will definitely be moving forward with federal charges." "How serious would those charges typically be?" I asked with the tone of a concerned citizen rather than someone who was hoping for maximum punishment. "Multiple felony counts involving systematic fraud over several years," she replied. "We typically see prison sentences of 8 to 15 years for this level of criminal activity, along with complete asset forfeiture and permanent destruction of credit and employment prospects." I nodded seriously as if this news was unfortunate rather than exactly what I had been hoping to hear. "Understand," I said. "I just felt it was my civic duty to report what I had discovered during my own investigation." As I left the federal building, I felt lighter and more energetic than I had in months. The wheels of federal justice were now turning, and there was absolutely nothing David or Amanda could do to stop them. They had wanted my money because they thought they deserved it simply for being my family. Instead, they were about to lose everything they had because they had tried to take what belonged to other people through lies and fraud. Some people might call that irony or poetic justice. I called it absolutely perfect. 2 months later, I was having my morning coffee on my apartment balcony when it happened. I was watching the sunrise and thinking about what kind of garden I wanted to plant at my house when my phone buzzed with a breaking news alert. "Local couple arrested in federal mortgage fraud investigation." I opened the article with steady hands, though my heart was racing with anticipation and excitement. David Thompson, 38, and Amanda Thompson, 35, were arrested this morning at their temporary residence on multiple charges including conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, wire fraud, and making false statements to financial institutions. The couple allegedly falsified income documents and tax returns to obtain mortgages totaling more than $700,000 over a 4-year period. FBI Special Agent Maria Rodriguez stated that the investigation began following a tip from a concerned citizen who provided detailed documentation of the alleged crimes. This case represents systematic fraud across multiple loan applications and financial institutions, Agent Rodriguez said in a prepared statement. The defendants created fictional income sources and inflated their actual earnings by more than 60% in order to qualify for loans they were not legally entitled to receive. The couple appeared in federal court this afternoon where they pleaded not guilty to all charges. They were released on $100,000 bond each, pending trial. If convicted, they face up to 25 years in federal prison and fines of up to $2 million. I set down my coffee cup and read the article again, savoring every single word of it. Then I called Karen Phillips to make sure David and Amanda's arrest would not affect my ownership of the house in any way. "Karen," I said, "I assume you have seen the news about the former tenants and their legal troubles." "I did see that, yes. Quite shocking, really. I have never had rental property connected to a federal criminal case before. Will this affect your ownership of the house in any legal way?" "Not at all," Karen assured me. "You purchased the property legally through a legitimate foreclosure auction. Their criminal activities are completely separate from your ownership rights. The house is yours free and clear regardless of what happens to them in the criminal justice system." Perfect, I said, though I had already known that would be the answer. I had been careful to make sure every aspect of my plan was completely legal and above board. Next, I called Detective Mills to thank him for his excellent investigative work. I saw the arrests on the morning news, he said. I have to say, Mrs. Hartwell, you have remarkable instincts. Most people would never have thought to investigate mortgage fraud, but you were absolutely right to be suspicious. I have always believed that people who lie about small things probably lie about big things as well, I replied. Well, you certainly proved that theory correct. The FBI agent I spoke with said this was one of the most clear-cut cases of systematic fraud she had seen in years. The evidence was completely overwhelming. After I hung up, I allowed myself a moment of pure satisfaction and vindication. Everything was falling into place exactly as I had planned and hoped it would. David and Amanda were not just homeless now. They were facing serious federal prison time that would destroy their lives permanently. Their children would grow up knowing their parents were convicted felons. Amanda's perfect reputation in their social circle was destroyed forever. Most importantly, they now understood that the woman they had dismissed as a helpless old fool had orchestrated their complete downfall through intelligence, determination, and careful planning. Around noon, my old phone started buzzing frantically with incoming calls. David's number appeared on the screen, followed immediately by calls from numbers I did not recognize. Probably Amanda calling from different phones or friends trying to reach me on their behalf. I let every call go to voicemail, then listened to the messages that evening out of curiosity about how they were handling their new reality. David's voice was barely recognizable, broken with panic and desperation that made him sound like a frightened child. Mom, please pick up the phone. I know you are there and I know you are getting these messages. The FBI arrested us this morning on charges of mortgage fraud. They say someone reported us and provided evidence of our financial records. I need you to help me understand what is happening and how to fight these charges. Please, Mom, Emma and Sam are staying with Amanda's parents, and they are scared and confused about why their mommy and daddy were arrested. I need my mother right now more than I have ever needed anyone in my entire life. I need my mother right now. Where was that sentiment when he told me I was worthless unless I handed over my life savings? Where was that respect and love when he sat quietly while his wife called me a useless old woman who did not deserve to keep her own money? Amanda's message was shorter and filled with rage rather than desperation. Eleanor, I do not know exactly what you have done, but I know this is your fault somehow. You disappear for weeks, you refuse to help your own family, and then suddenly we are arrested for financial crimes. That cannot possibly be a coincidence. You need to call us back immediately so we can discuss how you are going to help us resolve this situation. We are still your family whether you like it or not, and families help each other in times of crisis. I deleted both messages without feeling even the slightest bit of guilt or remorse. The next morning brought even more satisfying news. The local newspaper had picked up the story with a more detailed article that included photographs from their court appearance. David looked broken and defeated in his wrinkled suit, his face showing the strain of someone whose carefully constructed world had collapsed overnight. Amanda's perfect composure had cracked completely. Her expensive hairstyle was messy, her makeup smeared, her designer clothes wrinkled like she had slept in them. The article included additional details about the scope of their fraud. The FBI had discovered evidence of false statements dating back 6 years, involving not just their primary residence but also a vacation condo they had purchased and lost to foreclosure within 18 months. The total amount of fraudulent loans exceeded $850,000 across multiple financial institutions. Each bank they had defrauded would be entitled to restitution, meaning David and Amanda would be financially destroyed even if they somehow avoided prison time. I clipped the newspaper article and put it in the folder with all the other documents from this entire saga. Someday I might want to look back and remember exactly what justice looked like when it finally arrived after years of being delayed. That afternoon I drove to my house to check on its condition now that David and Amanda had been forced to move out. Karen had given me a preliminary report, but I wanted to see everything with my own eyes and start planning what changes I wanted to make. There was a note taped to the front door, obviously left by David before his arrest. Mom, I know this is you somehow. I know you are the one who bought our house and destroyed our family. I do not understand how you could do this to your own son and grandchildren. Please call me so we can talk about fixing this situation." I threw the note in the garbage without reading it completely and spent the next 2 hours walking through the empty rooms, planning renovations and imagining how I would decorate each space to suit my own taste rather than Amanda's pretentious style. The master bedroom would become my craft room and library, something I had always wanted but never had space for in my smaller house. The formal dining room would become a music room with a piano I had always dreamed of learning to play. The kitchen was actually quite nice once you ignored Amanda's gaudy decorating choices and expensive gadgets. For the first time since this whole situation began, I found myself thinking about the future instead of dwelling on the past. I could sell my original house and move here permanently. I could afford to renovate this place exactly the way I wanted it. I could plant a vegetable garden, join the neighborhood associations, maybe even get a dog. As I locked the door and walked back to my car, I noticed Mrs. Martinez working in her front garden. She waved and I walked over to say hello, curious about what the neighbors were saying about recent events. "Mrs. Hartwell," she said, "I was so surprised to hear about David and Amanda's arrest. Such a complete shock to everyone in the neighborhood. We had no idea they were involved in anything illegal." "Yes, it must have been quite surprising," I agreed. "And that whole situation with the foreclosure and the mysterious buyer who purchased their house. Did they ever find out who bought the property?" I smiled my most innocent grandmother smile. "I believe they figured it out eventually," I said. "Well, I hope whoever bought it will be a good neighbor," Mrs. Martinez said. "This has always been such a quiet, respectable street. We prefer families who follow the law and pay their bills honestly." "I am sure the new owner will fit in perfectly," I replied. As I drove home, I thought about Mrs. Martinez's expression when she eventually learned that the mysterious buyer was the supposedly harmless grandmother she had been chatting with for years. The whole neighborhood would be talking about it for months once the truth came out. Let them talk. I had nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of. I had simply recognized an opportunity to seek justice using nothing but legal means and publicly available information. If David and Amanda had been honest about their finances, none of this would have happened. If they had not tried to extort my life savings through emotional blackmail, I never would have looked into their mortgage records or discovered their pattern of fraud. If they had treated me with respect instead of contempt, I would have remained the doting mother and grandmother they could manipulate and take advantage of forever. They had created every single step in the chain of events that led to their arrest and imprisonment. I had simply recognized their mistakes and helped those mistakes reach their natural conclusion. Some people might call that cold-hearted or vindictive. I preferred to think of it as efficient and proportionate. They had tried to steal my future security through threats and manipulation. Now they would spend their own future in federal prison where they belonged. The trial began 11 months later on a gray winter morning that felt like the perfect ending to a long, difficult chapter of my life. I dressed carefully in my navy suit and gold jewelry, looking every inch the respectable citizen I had always been. The media attention had faded by then since mortgage fraud was not exciting enough to hold public interest for very long. But I wanted to be present for every moment of their legal reckoning, to witness firsthand the consequences of their choices finally catching up with them. I sat in the back row of the courtroom gallery, close enough to observe everything but far enough away to remain anonymous among the other spectators. David and Amanda sat at the defendant table with their court-appointed attorney, a young woman who clearly understood she was fighting an unwinnable battle. Amanda had lost considerable weight during the months leading up to trial. Her previously perfect appearance was now hollow and worn, her expensive clothes replaced with a simple black dress that looked like it came from a discount store. David appeared to have aged 10 years in 12 months, his face gaunt and lined with stress. Neither of them noticed me enter the courtroom. They were too focused on their attorney's whispered explanations and the intimidating presence of the federal prosecutor's table, where 3 serious-looking lawyers were organizing stacks of evidence with military precision. The prosecutor was Helen Chong, a woman about my age with silver hair and the kind of commanding presence that demanded attention and respect. During her opening statement, she laid out the case against David and Amanda with surgical precision. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, she began. Over the next week you will hear evidence of a deliberate, systematic scheme to defraud multiple financial institutions out of nearly $1 million. The defendants, David and Amanda Thompson, did not make innocent mistakes on their loan applications. They created entirely fictional financial profiles complete with false tax returns, inflated income statements, and businesses that existed only on paper. She walked to an easel displaying a timeline of their fraudulent activities. In 2019, they claimed combined income of $93,000 when their actual income was $51,000. In 2021, they claimed income of $120,000 when they actually earned $68,000. They obtained over $800,000 in fraudulent loans using these deliberate lies. I watched David and Amanda's faces as the prosecutor methodically destroyed their credibility. Amanda kept her chin raised, trying to maintain some dignity, but her hands were shaking visibly in her lap. David stared at the table, apparently unable to look at the jury that would decide whether he spent the next decade in federal prison. This was not desperation, Prosecutor Chong continued, moving closer to the jury box. This was pure greed. The defendants wanted a lifestyle they could not afford, so they lied repeatedly and systematically to obtain money that did not belong to them. The defense attorney's opening statement was pathetic and unconvincing. She tried to portray David and Amanda as victims of aggressive lending practices, claiming they had been encouraged by loan officers to inflate their income figures. She suggested they were naive rather than criminal, confused rather than calculating. The jury looked skeptical from the beginning. These were not sympathetic defendants. They were an attractive, educated middle-class couple who had systematically cheated the system for years while other honest families struggled to qualify for loans they actually deserved. The prosecution case unfolded over 6 days, each piece of evidence more damning than the last. They presented original loan applications side by side with actual tax returns, showing the stark differences in a way that even the most sympathetic juror could not ignore or explain away. They brought in handwriting experts who confirmed that falsified documents had been altered by David and Amanda personally. Bank officials testified about their standard verification procedures, and how the defendants had circumvented normal safeguards through deliberate deception. The star witness was Detective Mills, my private investigator. He testified about his methods and findings with professional detachment that made his conclusions seem unassailable. He never mentioned who had hired him, referring only to a concerned citizen who had provided the initial information that led to his investigation. When the defense attorney tried to cross-examine him, suggesting his investigation had been biased or incomplete, Mills remained completely unshakable. "Ma'am," he said calmly, "I simply gathered publicly available documents and compared them to the loan applications your clients submitted. The discrepancies were obvious and significant. Any competent investigator would have reached the same conclusions." On the 4th day of trial, David took the witness stand to testify in his own defense. It was a complete disaster that sealed his fate and Amanda's as well. Under cross-examination by Prosecutor Chong, he fell apart completely. "Mr. Thompson," she said, "when you signed this loan application stating your annual income was $95,000, what was your actual annual income that year?" "I thought it might increase," David stammered. "I was expecting a promotion or maybe some consulting work on the side." "But you did not receive a promotion, did you? And your actual income that year was $53,000, correct?" "Yes, but I was trying to provide for my family. I just wanted us to have a nice home." "So you lied on a federal document in order to obtain money you were not qualified to receive." "I was not trying to hurt anyone. I thought I could make the payments if my income went up like I hoped it would." "But hope is not the same as fact, is it, Mr. Thompson? You deliberately provided false information to obtain a loan you knew you could not afford." Amanda's testimony was even worse. She broke down crying on the witness stand, which only made her appear more guilty and manipulative to the jury. Her tears seemed calculated rather than genuine, like a performance designed to evoke sympathy rather than an authentic expression of remorse. The defense attorney's closing argument was brief and ineffective. She made one final plea for leniency, suggesting that David and Amanda had made mistakes and learned their lessons. But the evidence was overwhelming and everyone in the courtroom knew it. Prosecutor Chang's closing was devastating in its simplicity. The defendants want you to believe this was all a misunderstanding, that they are victims rather than criminals. But the evidence shows a pattern of deliberate fraud spanning 6 years and involving nearly $1 million. They did not make mistakes. They made choices, criminal choices, and now they must face the consequences of those choices. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. When they returned with their verdict, I watched David and Amanda stand to face their judgment. Amanda was gripping David's arm so tightly her knuckles had turned white. David was swaying slightly as if he might collapse. On the charge of conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, we find the defendant David Thompson guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit mortgage fraud, we find the defendant Amanda Thompson guilty. The judge read through all the charges methodically. Wire fraud, making false statements to financial institutions, conspiracy to commit bank fraud. The verdict was the same for each count. Guilty, guilty, guilty. I watched Amanda collapse into her chair, sobbing openly with the raw desperation of someone whose life had just ended. David stood there staring at nothing, apparently unable to process what had just happened to his future. The judge scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks later, and released them on continued bond pending a pre-sentence investigation. As they were escorted from the courtroom, Amanda looked around desperately as if searching for someone who might help her or save her from what was coming. For just a moment, her eyes met mine across the crowded gallery. I saw recognition flicker across her face, followed by understanding and then pure hatred. She knew. Finally, after all these months, she knew exactly who had destroyed her life and why. I smiled back at her. Not a cruel smile, not a triumphant one, just a small satisfied smile that said, I hope you finally understand that actions have consequences. As they left the courtroom with their attorney, I gathered my purse and walked calmly toward the exit. In the hallway, reporters were already updating their stories on phones and tablets. This would be a small item in tomorrow's newspaper, buried somewhere in the local news section. But for me it was the most important headline of my life. It was vindication, justice, and closure all wrapped up in one perfect guilty verdict. I drove home slowly, taking the scenic route through neighborhoods where David and Amanda had once pretended to belong. Past the country club where Amanda had played tennis with women who would never speak to her again. Past the private school Emma and Sam had attended before their parents' arrest made continued enrollment impossible. When I reached my apartment, I opened a bottle of champagne. Good champagne, the expensive kind I had always saved for special occasions that never seemed to arrive. Tonight felt like the most special occasion of my entire life. I raised my glass to the empty room and spoke words I had been waiting months to say. Justice is served cold, and it tastes absolutely perfect. Tomorrow I would finalize my plans to move into the house permanently. Tonight I would celebrate the knowledge that David and Amanda were sitting somewhere planning their appeals, finally understanding the full consequences of treating people like disposable assets. They had demanded my money or my absence from their lives. They had gotten my absence along with the loss of their home, their freedom, and their future. Some people might call that excessive or vindictive. I called it proportional and fair. They had tried to take everything from me. I had simply returned the favor with interest. Sentencing day arrived 6 weeks later with the quiet finality of a door closing forever. Judge Patricia Williams had a well-deserved reputation for imposing harsh sentences on white-collar criminals who showed no genuine remorse for their crimes. I arrived early and took my usual seat in the back row. David and Amanda were already at the defendant table wearing the same clothes they had worn during their conviction. Amanda looked like she had lost even more weight, and David's hands were trembling as he shuffled through papers with his attorney. The courtroom was nearly empty this time. No media attention, no curious neighbors, just the necessary court officials, a few family members, and me. Amanda's mother sat in the front row, her face tight with the kind of anger that comes from watching your life disrupted by someone else's stupidity and greed. Judge Williams reviewed the pre-sentence reports methodically, her expression revealing nothing about what she was thinking or planning. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the absolute authority of someone who had seen every type of criminal and knew exactly how to respond to each one. "Mr. and Mrs. Thompson," she began, "you have been convicted of multiple felonies involving systematic mortgage fraud over a period of 6 years. The court has reviewed your financial history, your lack of prior criminal convictions, and the impact statements from the financial institutions you defrauded." She paused, looking directly at them with undisguised contempt. "The prosecution has recommended sentences of 12 to 15 years in federal prison, along with complete asset forfeiture and full restitution in the amount of $897,000. The court agrees with that recommendation. Mr. Thompson, you are hereby sentenced to 13 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Mrs. Thompson, you are sentenced to 12 years under the same conditions." Amanda made a choking sound like she was being strangled. The sentences were longer than even I had hoped for, ensuring that Emma and Sam would be adults by the time their parents were released from prison. Furthermore, Judge Williams continued, all assets acquired through fraudulent loans are subject to immediate forfeiture. This includes vehicles, jewelry, furniture, and any other personal property purchased with the proceeds of your crimes. You will also be jointly responsible for paying full restitution to the defrauded institutions, which will likely consume any future earnings for the remainder of your lives. As the bailiff approached to escort them into custody, Amanda finally broke down completely. She sobbed with the raw desperation of someone who had finally grasped the full scope of her destruction. David tried to comfort her, but his own hands were shaking too violently to be of any real help. Neither of them looked toward the gallery this time. They were too consumed by their own misery and terror to notice the woman who had orchestrated their complete downfall sitting quietly in the back row, watching their lives end with the calm satisfaction of a job perfectly completed. After they were led away in handcuffs, I sat in the empty courtroom for several minutes longer, absorbing the finality of it all. 12 and 13 years in federal prison. Complete financial ruin that would last for the rest of their lives. Their children would be raised by relatives who would always remember why Mommy and Daddy had abandoned them. It was more thorough and devastating than anything I could have planned or imagined when this all started. I drove directly from the courthouse to my house, and after 14 months of legal ownership, it truly felt like home now. I had already moved most of my belongings from my old place and begun the renovations I had been planning. The master bedroom was now my personal sanctuary, decorated with antiques and family photos that actually mattered to me. The formal dining room had become my library and craft room, lined with bookshelves and comfortable chairs for reading. I had completely renovated the kitchen, stripping away Amanda's pretentious design choices and replacing them with classic elegance. But my favorite space was the garden I had been cultivating for months. The roses were thriving, and I had planted vegetables and herbs in neat, productive rows. It was exactly the kind of garden I had always dreamed of having but never had space for in my smaller house. I made myself lunch and ate at the kitchen table, looking out at my garden and thinking about how peaceful and satisfying my life had become. No more demands for money from ungrateful family members. No more threats or ultimatums or emotional manipulation. Just quiet, comfortable independence funded by smart financial decisions and protected by legal ownership. That afternoon I called my former neighbor Mrs. Patterson to let her know I had sold my old house and moved permanently to my new address. She was happy for me and curious about my sudden prosperity, so I explained that I had made some successful investments in real estate. Which was completely true, I reflected after hanging up. I had invested in real estate and it had paid off handsomely in ways that went far beyond simple financial returns. I had invested in justice, and the dividends had exceeded all my expectations. Before going to sleep that first night in my house as a completely free woman, I stood on the front porch looking at the neighborhood I now belonged to. Mrs. Martinez waved from her yard and we chatted briefly about the book club meeting next week. "It is so wonderful to have someone stable and reliable living in that house," she said. "The previous owners seemed like nice people, but there was always so much drama and chaos. Police cars, lawyers, federal agents. It was exhausting for the whole neighborhood. I prefer a quiet, peaceful lifestyle, I said mildly. After she went inside, I remained on the porch as darkness settled over my property and my new life. This was my favorite time of day, when the neighborhood quieted down and I could sit with my thoughts in complete tranquility. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Probably Amanda's mother or some other family member trying to reach me about Emma and Sam. I had been expecting this contact for months, ever since the children had been placed in foster care with relatives. Mrs. Hartwell, the message read, "This is Linda Mitchell, Amanda's mother. Emma and Sam ask about their grandmother sometimes. They do not understand why you have not visited or called. Would you like to arrange a meeting so they can see you?" I stared at the message for a long time, thinking about my grandchildren who were now 9 and 7 years old. Old enough to understand that their parents were in prison but not old enough to comprehend the full complexity of why their family had been destroyed. I could arrange a visit. I could try to explain that Mommy and Daddy had made some very bad choices but that grandmother still loved them. I could become part of their lives again and help them navigate the trauma their parents had created through greed and stupidity. But that would require forgiveness I did not feel and did not want to feel. It would require pretending that David and Amanda's betrayal had not revealed their true character. It would require rebuilding relationships with people who had shown me exactly how little I meant to them when they thought I was no longer useful. More importantly, it would require me to model forgiveness for children whose parents had used them as weapons against me. David and Amanda had made their choice when they gave me that ultimatum. They had chosen to treat me as disposable, valuable only for my ability to solve their financial problems. Now they were living with the consequences of that choice, and so were their children. I deleted the message without responding and turned off my phone. Tomorrow I would tend my garden and read my books and enjoy the quiet satisfaction of a life finally lived entirely on my own terms. Some stories end with reconciliation and forgiveness and families healing together. Some stories end with redemption and second chances and love conquering all obstacles. This story ended with a 72-year-old woman sitting in her own beautiful home, surrounded by her own carefully chosen possessions, accountable to no one but herself. It ended with justice served completely and debts paid in full with interest. It ended with the understanding that sometimes the people who claim to love you are actually just keeping track of what you can do for them. And it ended exactly as it should have, with the woman who had been underestimated and dismissed proving that she was far more dangerous than anyone had ever imagined. I raised my final glass of wine to the evening sky and whispered a toast to new beginnings, second acts, and the sweet satisfaction of watching consequences finally catch up to people who thought they were too smart to get caught. Tomorrow would be the first day of the rest of my life, and it was going to be absolutely perfect.